All right, we are looking at Golgari Graves, a deck I've been playing relatively frequently. It's a blast to play. It's quite competitive. I'm not saying it's tier one competitive or it's going to change the meta. That I don't believe is going to be the case. However, it's got game against a lot of different decks. We're going to go over some card choices, some different things, layouts, design, and some gameplay. One thing you'll notice, we'll start with the mana base. These are snow covered forests and snow covered swamps, and woodland chasm, which is also a snow covered land, swamp forest. Why are we using snow covered lands? This is all for Priest of the Haunted Edge. So when you look at the deck, you'll notice that there's no removal main deck except for Priest. No cast downs, no Chainer's Edicts, no anything. There are 20 lands, 31 creatures, 9 other spells. So we have Seed of Hope, Crawl from the Cellar as your non creature spells. But your only removal is going to be Priest of the Haunted Edge. So we have to run snow covered lands for that package. That particular card is really more of just in a pinch. Occasionally there's a creature that you just have to get rid of, but the deck itself is designed to power out big creatures like Writhing Necromass, Gurmag Angler. So instead of ramping into them, it's kind of pseudo ramp where you're filling your graveyard full of creatures and then using Gurmag Angler's delve ability or Necromass's discount on the number of creatures in the graveyard. The cool thing about the deck that I found is very consistent in hitting its land drops. You have uh, 12 untapped lands, which are great for trying to ensure that turn two play more than the turn one play. It curves out very, very well. How are we hitting our land drops? We have Seed of Hope that can pick up a land, Blanchwood Prowler that picks up a land, Satyr Wayfinder that picks up a land. Werebear as tapping for green is not something the deck wants to do. It will do it in a pinch, but we don't want to be playing Werebear on turn two unless we absolutely have to. It's more of a probably turn four play. So when you look at the power toughness aspect, the creatures that are really getting the job done, Werebear as a 4/4 is kind of your pseudo mirror enforcer. Writhing Necromass, Gurmag Angler. It's a lot of power and toughness that's on the battlefield that you are recurring with Crawl from the Cellar, which you can do twice because it has flashback. So even though there are 2 Crawl from the Cellars in the deck, essentially you have 4. And you have Eerie Soul Tender, who for 5 mana will bring a creature back from the graveyard. That Eerie Soul Tender's ability happens frequently. The games, they don't go long in the sense that you're worried about time, but they're a little bit more grindier games. You can curve out with some early game pressure if Blanchwood Prowler, if I have a hand with 3 lands in it, I'm not necessarily looking to hit more land drops. I want them and I expect to get them. But if I've got 3 lands in hand, say in a Blanchwood Prowler, I'm probably not plucking a land out unless I'm trying to fix a color. But you've got Satyr Wayfinder, Blanchwood Prowler, Seed of Hope, to along the low end of the curve, you're hitting your land drops pretty consistently. Very rarely are you stuck on mana and getting mana screwed. All kinds of ways to find it. Optimally, what you want to see, as most decks with 31 creatures in it, you want to curve out. Not really that concerned about a turn one play. I will play Seed of Hope if necessary. But what I prefer to do is go Woodland Chasm on one. This deck wants more black than green in the long run. It just needs green early to hit those creatures. But I would rather go Woodland Chasm on one, followed by a Swamp on two. And depending on what I have in my hand, if I have a Necromass in hand, this is more of a Necromass deck than anything. It's it's not really a Gurmag Angler deck. You have to be careful with Gurmag. Right, it's more of a Writhing Necromass deck. So you want to go. Let's say you got 2 lands in play on two. If I have a Necromass in my hand, I'd rather go Satyr Wayfinder over Blanchwood Prowler, and then follow it up with an Eerie Soul Tender. and then a turn 4 Writhing Necromass, or maybe turn 5 if necessary. So Gurmag Angler is, you have to monitor that graveyard. And if your graveyard on the early turns have a whole lot of lands in it and different things like that, then Gurmag is fine to play. But you have to be careful because you don't want to turn off your Werebear. Necromass isn't turning off anything. It just works on its casting cost of creatures in the graveyard. Gurmag is there to remove, once you get into later stages, you're removing the fetchlands that are in the graveyard, any lands that might be in there, Seed of Hopes, things like that. Sideboard, very, very specific, very easy. Let me say this too about the main deck. You've got one of Masked Vandal. We call that a Miser's copy. Somebody asked me one time what Miser meant. It's a Misewell. So you have one copy of Masked Vandal, which will hit a target or strategic artifact or enchantment. But you have 3 copies of Masked Vandal in the sideboard for what? We're going to use that against Affinity, obviously. Journey to Nowhere decks. If you're running against Bogles, Masked Vandal is what's there to do the job. Crypt Rats is in the deck for fairies, mono white aggro, any heavy aggro deck that you're looking to wipe the board with. It's also a finisher in its own right. You'll notice that in the main deck there is Naught of Bone, and Naught of Bone can crank your life total up to insane amounts. So you will see that in the game that we're going to play. Even though we got to a ridiculous life total, we lost that particular game because of decking ourselves and things like that, which you have to be careful with. But Crypt Rats is mainly for anti-fairies, anti-mono white aggro. On occasion, it's not really an anti-Bogles card, but usually their Bogles are too big. Fairy Macabre is very specific. I like to bring it in the Affinity matchup. Some of Affinity's success comes from their recursion. You deal with the creatures and then you're just can't seem to get rid of them. They recur them just like we do, right? Except we don't run Blood Fountain. We run Crawl from the Cellar and Eerie Soul Tender's ability. Rancid Earth is in there for the Tron matchups, the Familiars matchups, Gates decks. The thing about running non-creature spells in this, if your spell gets milled into the graveyard, you're not getting it back. You can do it with creatures, hence we have Masked Vandal. Rancid Earth is there. Hopefully just one copy will get you through. Maybe you get 2. But if it goes into the graveyard, there's nothing you're going to do about that. Tormod's Crypt and Nihil Spellbomb, or Nihil Spellbomb. I like it for the Affinity matchup. Personally, I don't think we wouldn't run Relic because it turns off our own graveyard. But Relic, let's say we were playing Relic in a deck, it's not as devastating against Terror and Gurmag Angler decks as what people think. You might slow a turn or 2 down, but it's not really, which is important. That's a good thing. But it's not shutting it off. And you'll see in this match too, I'm pretty sure it is. It's effective against us, but it's not backbreaking. It only becomes backbreaking when you kick it so late in the game that it's kind of difficult to recover from. But when they kick it off early, it's not big of a deal. So the Torments, Crypts, Nihil Spellbombs, Fairy Macabres are more for your anti-affinity matchup. We will bring in some stuff that's, if we end up facing a deck that's, recurring a lot of creatures frequently, we can bring it in. So it's a really fun deck to play. Gains a lot of life out of Riveteer's Overlook. You'll notice that Gorging Vulture gains a life for when you mill the cards into the graveyard. It gains 1 life for every creature milled that way. Gnaw of the Bone is really 6 copies because it has flashback. Fun deck to play. It's got game. I hope you enjoy it, playing it as much as I do. Let's go ahead and get into some games. So this is going to be match 1, game 1. I'm sure there'll be mistakes along the way. Let me press pause real quick. We're leading with Woodland Chasm, as we discussed before. It's a decent opening hand. How do we know that? We're going to curve out in the way that we want to. So we're going to go Woodland Chasm. Turn 1, turn 2 will be Snow-Covered Swamp. We should be going into Branchwood Prowler after that. We might be having to pick a land out of that because we're looking at turn 2 Prowler, turn 3 Soul Tender, and then evaluate where we're going from there. So as Prowler comes into the play, we didn't draw a land on our last drop, but we went ahead and picked up the land. I prefer Prowler to be a 2/2, but in this case, we have to leave it as a 1/1 because hitting the land drop is more important. I'm going to bring the graveyard up here. So we have 4 power on board, not too bad. Missed land drop, that's okay. Hopefully we'll find one with Satyr Wayfinder. Missed a land. Kind of figured the counter was coming, but that's okay because we've got plenty of ways to get that back. So getting countered or it getting removed from the board is not a big a deal as what other decks may have to face. But we know that we've got 7 cards in the graveyard and 2 werebears in hand. So if we hit a land drop, maybe off, preferably to draw it, we might have to see to hope it. It's great if we can go double werebear next turn because we have 2 4/4s on board if that's the case. But we're against blue-black, right? They haven't played their terrors and everything else yet. So the important part is really getting more necromasses and stuff on board because even if they make them a 6/6 with unexpected fangs, they're going to die. We'll trade. We'll bring ours back. But we've got 7, way more than 7 cards in the graveyard. If we do draw a necromass, we want to play it for 1 mana. So how many creatures do we have? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Tapped land's unfortunate. We can only get 1 werebear in play, and it potentially gets countered as well. And that again, it's okay. We will recur. I could have played Eerie Soul Tender here. The reason I didn't, I'm pretty confident, as you'll notice, they've only got 3 cards in play. I feel semi-confident that they have Suffocating Fumes in hand at the moment. It's just a question of when they're going to play it. Getting Crawl from the Cellar Spell Pierced. You know they've got missing their land drops. They're fully loaded with some combination of multiple terrors, multiple spells. So we just have to try to power through. Gorging Vulture is a thing. They can't block it. That 2 damage can and will come into play at some point. A lot of cards in the graveyard. If we kick a Bone, it's going to be crazy. The Unexpected Fangs is a problem. I don't have Gurmag Angler on the board. I don't have Writhing Necromass on the board. We can team block if necessary, but right now I'm thinking I'm going to kick a Bone for a really high amount. So I wasn't worried as blocking at that specific time. And we just keep filling the graveyard. We have 20 cards in the library. Another Bone. I'm not a big fan of just gaining life for the sake of gaining life, but it does come into play on occasion. Here's the Suffocating Fumes that we were looking at. But he was loaded, right? I mean, he missed his land drops, and if you're missing land drops, you've got plenty of spells and creatures to deal with. We're at 49 life now. That's pretty decent, but it's really just buying time for us to try to stabilize. My concern at the moment is that we might deck in this game, right? We've got 16 cards left. I need multiple Necromasses, multiple Anglers to fight what he's got going on. Team blocking is great, but the problem is if I triple block and they say cast down or something like that, it's a blowout on our end. So double fangs is really an issue. It's Necromass or bust at the moment. 122 life certainly buys you quite a bit of turns. But again, at that point, with only 10 cards left in the deck, this is going to be a struggle. So I don't interpret 122 as we're far ahead in the game. And you notice we're a little bit behind on time too. At the time I had my stops, a lot of stops were set. and it's because I'm playing so many different decks all the time, but I have straightened that out and made the time much better in our favor. 8 cards in deck. I think attacking here was a mistake. One of the cool thing about having black creatures, you shut off their snuff outs. Um, it's a big thing. A lot of Golgari, not Golgari, but a lot of the Gardens decks. I'm not sure why I didn't block there. Mistake on my part. Hoping at the time I had a plan, something made sense, but looking at it now, I think that was probably a mistake. It's just getting the 6/6s off the board. 6 cards left in the deck. Now, I don't mind trading here again. We can bring things back. Excuse me. And I concede at this point mainly because I'm concerned about decking and not being able to win. So on to game 2. Game 2 opener's not that great, just 1 land. This is not bad. We don't have our large creatures, but we've got green and black untapped, and we can go Prowler, Wayfinder, any of those things. I don't go Wayfinder here because typically, as we said at the beginning, I'll go Wayfinder on turn 2 if I have a Necromass on hand or in hand. If I don't, I tend to lead with Blanchwood Prowler. Necromass is in the graveyard, so is an Eerie Soul Tender. But this is what, four power coming your way. It's an early Fumes. I'm kind of fine with that because that powers out the Necromass. A lot of interactions going on here. But him killing the creatures with the Necro in hand, I get to power it out early. 6/6 Death Touch can't be snuffed out, so we're down to Chainer's Edict and a cast down only to worry about. And we get cast down. But in the graveyard, there is 2 copies of Eerie Soul Tender, so we can get our Necromasses back. You can't counter the ability of Eerie Soul Tender. You can only counter if I bring it back into play. And you notice that crawl from the cellar, putting that extra counter on a zombie, we survive in an attack versus terror. I say I don't attack with the Werebear here because I feel like I'm going to have to use it because I have to play the Eerie Soul Tender and then cast Necromass for 2. So that's the reason for not attacking with Werebear. A lot of pressure the opponent right now. A lot of pressure. Denial Spellbomb at this point is not that big of a deal. Like, we've gotten what we wanted to get out of it, so it's just not that big of a deal, and we can refill relatively quickly. And the opponent is done. Match 1, game 3. We're keeping this opening hand because we had a Seed of Hope in hand. So if we can hit the land drop off Seed, which we do, then we can go ahead and hit Satyr Wayfinder on 2 with the Necromass in hand. I did go Blanchwood Prowler on this go around. Should have gone Satyr Wayfinder, in my opinion, but 2/2 is relevant. It dodges Fumes, but in my opinion, that's a misplay. Right now, I'm just trying to hit land drops. Satyr Wayfinder can certainly do that, but I do have to worry about Nile Spellbomb, what you just saw. So you have to be kind of tactical and when and how you're filling up your graveyard. He's already used the one Spellbomb. I'm not sure how many they bring in, but I'm a little more aggressive to fill up the graveyard now than I would be in the early turns. But 13 life already for the opponent. But this is a really interesting game, and it's a great match, in my opinion. And I think the opponent too, at this point, realizes I mean, this is something, right? We've got Double Terror and Gurmag Angler on our empty board, but the Golgari Graves deck can establish a board presence and take control. As you can see, we just added, two Necromancers and an Angler. My big concern right now is that he's looking forward to unexpected things. I know he's got the Chainer's Edict in the graveyard that he can go ahead and use when necessary. I don't mind trading. The reason I don't mind trading is, again, there's Crawl from the Cellar. I have that. But there's also multiple Eerie Soul Tenders that can't be countered. I have 3 of those in the grave. So whatever I'm trading with, I can bring back. He cannot. I'm fine with that. Priest here can take out any of their creatures, but in this particular matchup, you got to be really careful. It's sorcery speed. So if I go without the 6 snowland, actually, I don't even have 6. I have 4 at the moment. Even if I had 5 snowlands, I got to be super careful that he doesn't fangs me, right? Now I've got 5. That's cool, but the priest is gone. 40 life is buying time, still putting pressure on with the werebear. Things are okay. I have no concern. He's only got 3 cards in hand, and he is digging. So I'm pretty confident right now. But you'll notice, too, on the Gorging Vulture, it comes into play. They have a difficult time with flyers. They can't snuff it out. I'm trying to keep more than 1 creature on the board just in case he's got other edicts. But the goal is to go ahead and crack the Eerie Soul Tenders, bring the Necromancers back out onto the table. And that was using Eerie Soul Tender's ability to bring the Necromass back out. I didn't feel like blocking there. I didn't think it was necessary. We have Gnaw of the Bones. We have Gorging Vulture. And you can see he's scrambling for an answer right now. He's got a counter spell or nothing. Because he can't stop the 2/2 flyer. Kept digging, couldn't find it. Hope you enjoyed the match. It was a blast to play. The opponent was great. I enjoyed it. Thanks so much. As always, I'm not the greatest player in the world by any means. Just playing the greatest game made.